I write as David Wong on the internet and on crack.com, but my real name is Jason Pargin. I am the executive editor of Cracked. And Jack, you are, what's your title?
I am the GM and editor-in-chief.
For the readers, or for the listeners who don't know, if you've watched Mad Men, like Jack is the Don Draper of Cracked.
And that I'm lying about my past and drunk most of the time.
And then I'm like the Peggy. Who was hired to bring on, and I've climbed the ladder, and then
slowly plotting my demise.
Yeah, Dan, I guess, would be like the Joan.
Jason, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, he said I am the executive editor. For those of you who don't know Cracked or know what those job titles mean, basically Jack is my boss, so he's like the Captain Jean-Luc Picard of our enterprise, and I'm like the Luke Skywalker. Yeah, and for people who aren't familiar with Cracked, basically Jack is sort of like the Axl Rose of our Guns N' Roses, and then I would be like the Matt Sorum, who was that chubby drummer they brought in later. For those of you not familiar with Cracked, if we were a baseball team, Jack would be the manager, I guess. And then I would be that guy, like there's a guy in uniform who stands behind first base, and his only job is when someone gets on base is he claps and tells that guy he's doing a good job.
Right.
For those of you not familiar with Cracked, Jack is my boss. If you've seen the show Homeland, Jack would be Mandy Patinkin's character, the director of the CIA, and then I would be like the Brody, who it appears he's on the side of the other guy of Saul, but secretly is building a suicide vest to blow up everyone and just trying to gain their trust one day at a time.
Which is pretty reassuring since you're actually coming out to the offices pretty soon.
And if you're not familiar with the structure of Cracked, if Jack is like the brains of the operation, I would be sort of like the sculpted buttocks of the operation.
Absolutely. That's the way it appears on our flow chart, at least.
Yeah, I'm the one that everyone stares at as we walk down the street. But you're the real behind the scenes, the force that really makes it go. But honestly, you could be replaced as long as the butt is still there. That's what puts the asses in the seats. I think we all know that.
Too true. Hitting really close to home here.
I don't know if the listeners understand why I'm on the phone, but I actually have a restraining order against Soren that he actually can't be within 1,200 miles of me. So if he goes on vacation, I actually have to move eastward. I'm in Tennessee. He's in California, but we have to have 2/3 of the country at least in between us.
The sexual chemistry is just too much for most people to handle.
I think it was unnecessary to have the lawyers in the room with me, Jason, but you do what you got to do. That's fine.
For those of you unfamiliar with Cracked and you're not clear on the structure, basically if Cracked.com was the Saved by the Bell high school, Jack would be like Mr. Belding.
Yep.
And then I would be, who was the guy who went on to make the sex tape because he had a huge penis?
Screech.
Yeah, I would be that guy, that actor.
Awesome.
And if people aren't familiar with who we are, basically if Crack.com was Apple, then Jack would be like the Steve Jobs, and I would be like the Dr. Dre.
That's
who
right.
sold the company headphones for $3 billion.
While constantly shouting Compton.
And for people unfamiliar with Cracked, if the site was like the movie Braveheart, then Jack would be like the William Wallace character, kind of the inspirational leader, and then I would be like Robert the Bruce. The guy who he thought was his friend, but then who betrayed him at the last minute because he got paid behind the scenes and was given like a nobility or something.
These are only getting more ominous, your analogies.
Basically, if Crack.com was like a pirate ship, Jack would basically be the rudder, and then I would be that statue of the naked woman they put on the bow.
Almost exactly. We actually have a painting that puts that into detailed relief that will be across the wall of our editorial rooms.
And for those of you tuning in for the first time, maybe aren't familiar with Cracked or who we are that's speaking, basically, if Cracked, the website, was like the Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring, then Jack would be like our Gandalf, and then I would be the actual ring, because it's like this piece of jewelry that's very shiny and attractive, but no one knows that it's actually embedded with the dark magic and pure malice of Sauron, the necromancer, and has the energy to destroy all of mankind.
And I do wear a lot of jewelry. Almost all of my fingers have rings on them, so it's an apt metaphor from that standpoint.
And yes, I'm joining by phone. We get continual complaints, people asking, what's wrong with Jason's microphone? It's the telephone.
Yeah,
We're
guys,
using an antiquated phone system that was installed in America in like the 1890s, and I'm sorry, the audio quality is just not the same.
I do want to be clear to our audience. Jason is in the office. He just refuses to be in the same room with us when we record this. He's just calling from his desk.
Again, the restraining order I have against Dan and all other members of the Crack staff that do not allow them to make eye contact with me.
I prefer to start a rumor that your relationship with the podcast is like Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock's relationship in Lake House, and you are calling from the 1800s. It doesn't just sound like that. So your knowledge of our popular culture is impressive.
I like that Jack thinks the Keanu Reeves part of the Lake House took place in the 1800s.
We make really clever pop culture references to things we've not seen.
Just have a vague awareness of the log line. Could be totally off. They're ghosts that are total busters. And yeah, we're kind of like that. So I think everyone has heard the saying that statistics are like assholes. Everyone's got one, and they're way more flexible than people think, and better at hiding things than you expect, I think, is the way it goes, right? On the phone, Jason Pargin, a.k.a. David Wong, most popular writer on the internet. Hello, Jason.
Hello, Jack, and please stop introducing me at things that way.
Well, stop telling me to before we start recording. It's really... You are, though. I'm proud of the fact that you are most popular writer on the internet, besides probably Bill Simmons and a few New York Times columnists. You would just rather I not talk about how massively popular a writer you are.
Because it sets the expectations so high for the podcast, and then it's like, it's got to be a letdown. That's why, like, David Blaine doing Street Magic, people get so much more excited than, like, David Copperfield does a big stage things like, this illusion will amaze you.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, really? Well, we'll see about that. Where David Blaine, like, he would walk up to strangers, like, outside a mall and say, hey, can I show you a magic trick? And they'd do an impressive, like, a mildly impressive trick, but they would flip out because, like, they assumed he was a hobo or something. Like, they didn't think that, like, oh, this homeless man's going to pull a piece of bubble gum out of his pocket or something. Like, they don't expect this amazing card trick. So setting expectations is like everything in entertainment. You got to kind of come in and...
And I'm joined on the phone by Jason Pargin, a.k.a. David Wong, the David Blaine of Cracked columnists. Jason.
Hello, Jack. And if people aren't familiar with Cracked or who we are, basically, like, if Cracked.com was an old-timey army, Jack would be our field general. And then I would be that little kid they made play the drums for some reason when they took the battlefield. Does anybody know why they did that? Like, they needed theme music, and they would kidnap some child and make him play them into battle.
I think old armies were like part military operations and part choreographed dance routine. And so it helped them sort of feel jazzy as they were shooting at one another.
Well, and I remember that. I think we had talked about it on a previous podcast, that the Battle of Gettysburg actually paused for 30 minutes for a drum solo. And that was just the custom back then. Like, you didn't dare interrupt it. The two opposing drummer boys would just have a drum off, and then the loser was killed.
Yeah, go back and find that one, folks. I think it was in our episode all about drum solos, the top 20 drum solos. And one of my favorite writers on the internet. How's that? Is that better for you? Does that make you less embarrassed?
Yeah, that's great, Jack. And for people listening in for the first time who don't know who's speaking, if Crack.com was, I can't remember the name of the movie, but there's this Japanese anime porno movie about an all-women's prison where all of the inmates have to dress as schoolgirls. The listeners know what I'm talking about, but the warden is that character that it's a half-man, half-squid creature, and all of his tentacles are penises. That's who Jack would be. And then the protagonist, he's like a centaur where the front half is a naked woman and the back half is a second naked woman. And she opposes the warden, and there's like a climactic battle/orgy at the end for control of the prison. That would be me. We'll look up the title later and edit it in. The listeners know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I like the assumption that the listeners know that, but are totally unfamiliar with. They've just like accidentally, their thumb has brushed past the Cracked podcast, and they've accidentally downloaded it and found themselves listening to it.
The fact that I'm joining by phone, there's a lot of confusion about this and rumors that it's because of a restraining order that I have against Soren. And a lot of people who came to the live podcast in Nashville noticed that on stage I was the hologram.
Right.
That's actually not due to any court action either of us have taken. The U.S. government passed a law that said we couldn't be in the same state.
It was
but
really
it's not
important.
anything personal between us. It was something that
Honestly,
Congress
it's for all of you. It's for your safety.
Yeah, you guys were seated in front of the president and given a speech that is remarkably similar to the speech that Riggs and Murtaugh get in Lethal Weapon.
But each one of us was a hologram because we couldn't even be at the Oval Office together. Imagine the disaster if the president,
What are they,
Jason, and
crazy?
Soren were all killed at once.
And yes, I'm joining by phone. Once again, if your people are commenting, there's nothing physically wrong with me. This is what it sounds like when you record a phone call for a podcast.
It's actually really distracting. In person, your voice is really beautiful. How's it going, Jason?
Hello, and yes, I'm joining by phone. For people who don't listen to previous episodes, I am currently incarcerated, so I'm on a payphone in a L.A. County jail that's due to a crime that I did not commit to the extent that they're saying I did.
A very Ashley Judd of you.
I'm wearing, to help draw a visual, I'm wearing finger gloves. It's just the finger part.
He has the missing
Because
pieces
when I'm in a cold room, it's not my palms that get cold, it's my fingers, it's my extremities that get cold. So it actually would be ludicrous to wear fingerless gloves to fight off cold. But I'm not making a judgment, I'm just saying.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense, Tom.
The fact that I'm joining by phone, this actually ties into the subject of today's podcast, because last week the last episode I was on, I was actually there in studio, and people were talking about how it sounds completely different than when I'm joining by phone, and people surprised that I have like a deep Australian accent in real life.
Right.
Because it's what's transmitted over the phone is different than if you saw me in person, it would be different still.
Okay, we do have to address this. I have actually bought a microphone that may or may not be working for this episode of the podcast, but people are going to notice. So I don't even know if it's necessary to tell people I'm joining by phone in the future.
Yeah.
Even though I am. And I think the big thing, like the big point we're going to be making in this hour-long episode is just how smooth my voice is, because most people don't realize that. They've only heard me over a phone line, and I think every point we're about to make, and it's a heavy subject, but I think the main takeaway from this is going to be I have a very smooth voice.
Yeah, we're going to be ranking the top 5 vowels to hear Jason say. And this is going to be our gun show we'll use for a thumbnail just to trick people. We'll throw in a photograph of either Jason or my ripped biceps without sleeves, so they'll think it's the other type of gun show. And and Jason, I appreciate you saying that you don't think my hair is a big deal, even though I spent $80 getting it blown out every time I saw you. But I'm glad it was that effortless.
Is there a point where we can start just pretending that I'm in the room with you?
Yeah.
Does it matter to the listeners that I'm not there?
Oh, you mean for the listener's sake? I thought you meant like for like a little role-playing thing for us. Yeah.
Jason, that's my drink. Put that down.
There you go.
Oh, Jason.
I have a 5 assistants here. The massager, the shoe tire.
Guys, put my drink down.
Yeah.
Guys.
Oh man, you're so good. I love this improv scene. Keeps having people mess with
Everybody
Alex's
wants
drink.
Alex's drink.
And if we have new listeners who don't really know who I am or who Jack is, basically, if Cracked was like the Batman versus Superman universe, I'm the equivalent of Superman, like the person with godlike power who's sort of gone insane with that power. And then Jack would be the equivalent of Zack Snyder, the guy behind the scenes who is secretly ruining everything.